And I remember you doing this amazing thing where you said to me, what's the worst case scenario? What's the worst possible outcome? What are you scared of, basically? And then you told me to just drop myself into that scenario, like take myself to that scene as if it had just happened, as if everything I was worried about had just happened. And then you sort of asked me, okay, what are you going to do now? And I remember thinking, well, I would just do whatever. I came up with a solution. And then it sort of dissolved all of the fear that I had around that scenario. And it wasn't that I then manifested anything bad in my life, but it was just that it dissolved the fear and the worry so that I could actually focus on, putting my attention on better things and actually having the outcome that I wanted for myself.
Hello, my beautiful friends. My name is Dr. Becc.
And I am Kristeen Barker, and this is Am I Doing It Wrong? A podcast for doctors by doctors. Dr. Becc is a mindset coach and medical doctor who specialises in liberating driven professional women from the limitations of perfectionism, imposter syndrome, and people pleasing. She's basically the cheat code for getting out of your own way, showing up authentically, and living a life you're proud of.
And Kristeen is a medical educator and nephrologist who creates resources for doctors in training that I truly think are an unfair advantage. She makes complex topics super simple and takes the pain and uncertainty out of passing your medical exams. Kristeen and I connected a few years ago via our online platforms, and over the years we've discussed countless highs, lows, and in-betweens of doctor life. And in doing so, we've experienced firsthand the power of vulnerable conversations to show us where we're getting in our own way and underestimating our capacity.
So we want you to be part of the conversation and experience these same results. Every week on the pod, we'll be bringing you conversations which shine light in dark places, normalise the doctor journey, ease unnecessary suffering, and give you actionable steps to thrive in all facets of your life. So grab a cuppa and get cozy for this week's episode of Am I Doing It Wrong? The podcast for doctors by doctors. How are you, Becc? I'm so excited for today's pod.
Oh, I'm really good. Yeah, I really liked our last podcast, so I'm feeling really happy. I think that's going to make a nice difference. But this one's so beautifully important too. And this one, you were like, we must do this today for my ducklings.
We must talk about this. Yes. So thank you for being here, Becc. I feel like this is literally me just like grabbing you and like making you sit here so I can ask you questions. But basically, yes, I would like your help because as you're aware, and as many of you are aware, I am in clinical exam season. I'm looking after a lot of doctor humans who are sitting their BBT clinical exams here in Australia and New Zealand. And I'm working, I guess, with a lot of people. I'm aware of a lot of people who have maybe failed the exam before and they're coming up to the second or third attempt. And what's happening is that since the exam date came out, people who were thriving, doing really well, bags of confidence, it's kind of derailed them a little bit. And what I think is happening is that they're having this narrative in their head like, oh no, I've got my exam date. What if I fail? What if I fail? What if I fail? And from that place, it's really difficult to then take in new information, revise old information, do what you're supposed to do, remain confident, remain calm, and be able to show up as your best self. And I feel like it's a really unhelpful mindset. And of course, you're a thought wizard. And I wondered if you could help us. But I remember something that you did with me. We had a one-on-one coaching session for something that was coming up in my life. And I remember you doing this amazing thing where you said to me, what's the worst case scenario? What's the worst possible outcome? What are you scared of, basically? And then you told me to just drop myself into that scenario, like take myself to that scene as if it had just happened, as if everything I was worried about had just happened. And then you sort of asked me, okay, what are you going to do now? And I remember thinking, well, I would just do whatever. I came up with a solution. And then it sort of dissolved all of the fear that I had around that scenario. And it wasn't that I then manifested anything bad in my life, but it was just that it dissolved the fear and the worry so that I could actually focus on, putting my attention on better things and actually having the outcome that I wanted for myself. So I feel like having had that experience with you in coaching, where you dropped me into my worst case scenario and then it just alleviated that fear, I was thinking that that would be an amazing tactic for some of my doctor humans who are studying their clinical. And I guess I just wanted to come and pick your brain about this and see how we could apply it to my group of clinical exam candidates right now, or even the written exam candidates, to be honest. But yeah, everyone who needs it for their exams.
I'm so glad that you had such a good experience. And that's been my experience with this strategy as well. It works in so many different aspects of my life, and I continue to use it over and over and over again to this day. And it doesn't come naturally. It's something that I have to step back usually and get a bit of self-awareness. It takes a bit of time to get to the self-awareness of these kind of cycles that I'm in, because it's a fear-related thing. We believe in the moment that there's something really to be afraid of, and then we get into that fight or flight cycle. We're just taking action, trying to alleviate that fear, to sort of thinking that alleviates the threat at the same time. So it's a very difficult cycle to become aware of in ourselves, because the fear is so convincing. And I think this is why, even though it might seem obvious when you're looking at it in retrospect as to why it was so useful, I really want people to recognize that if you're sitting here listening to this strategy and you're like, no, thank you, that will not apply, or does not work, that will not work for me. I just want you to keep an open mind, because that's what my mind says to me all the time too. It really, my mind, when I'm feeling fear, you want to think about what's happening. I'm feeling fear. And with that fear, I'm really believing that there's a threat, that something bad is going to happen. The last thing that I want to do is move cognitively or emotionally closer to that threat. It's the last thing you want to do. And often when I get coached, I'll come on myself to get coaching, and it will be my coach who directs me there. And I was like, I probably knew that I could have done that myself, but I didn't have the insight. I didn't have the self-awareness to do it. That's what blocks us. So keep an open mind with us today, guys. And as much as this it probably feels like the last thing you want to do, and it feels like a paradox about how it could possibly work, let me explain for you guys what's happening here. So when you're having these thoughts about failing your exam, the thought comes into your mind, and naturally, when you focus on that possibility in your future that you do not want to happen, your body is overflowed, probably in a very powerful, highly aroused way, with that fear. And that fear response that you're having, you want to check in with, is that fear response actually driving behaviors in me that are getting me closer to my goal of passing the exam? How is having this fear experience in my body actually affecting my behavior? And whether that be your actual actions that you take, whether you go to study more, or whether it affects you cognitively. How does, when you have an emotion in your body, when you're highly aroused, or when you've got a low level of arousal, when you've got high valence, so high positivity in your emotions, or low positivity or negativity in your emotions, how does that affect the way that you think? You first want to check in and make sure, is this thought process helping me or hindering me? If in the unlikely scenario, it is helping you, keep it. Keep doing what you're doing. Keep that exam fear. If you can actually see objectively it's useful to you, then keep doing it. This is not a cookie cutter approach. However, my experience with fear is more like Kristeen's experience in her example that she brought up, where when I feel fear, I just run in circles. And if anything, for me, it's usually a downward spiral circle that I'm doing. So it might superficially look like, that fear brings my attention to all the things that I'm doing wrong, and all the gaps that I have, and all the things I need to do better. Initially, yeah, it gets my attention, but it makes my mind so darty. And it makes my mind think that everything's urgent, because remember, I'm afraid. There's a threat. There's an imminent threat to me because I'm feeling afraid. That's what my brain thinks. So I'll just be doing things rapidly without really taking into account the bigger picture of what exactly I want to be doing with this precious time, coming up to studying your exams. So that's one thing. And then, sort of just taking action rather than taking strategic clever action that actually moves me towards my goals. And the other thing I think about is when I'm in this fear state, I get exhausted very quickly. You know, fear naturally switches on that sympathetic nervous system state. And now you're adrenalinized. You're mobilizing resources, these precious resources that you need to fuel your mind and your body over these next few weeks in exams. So I guess I'm telling you a bit of, you know, my own experience. It's also the experience that I often find with my clients. We think that the fear is useful, but in a lot of cases, that's just an error in our understanding of the fear. Does that resonate with you, Kristeen? And do you have scenarios where the fear is really like, does that not resonate with you in some ways? And you're like, no, actually, the fear is good in some cases.
Oh no, I completely resonate with this, and I can think of so many places like in my own life where this has shown up. But I think what you said before about how I remember that moment when you were coaching me and you were like, right, just take me to that worst case scenario, and I'm like, nope. Nope, because that's how I'm wired, right? And I have this thing where I like to be positive, so I'm like, nope, we're not doing that today, Becc. We're not doing that. So I can totally understand if you're sitting thinking, why would I do? Because I actually said this to someone the other day, and I said it to two people, and one person really got it, and they were like, "Oh, well, if I failed my exam, I would do this, and I would have a plan." And actually, that did alleviate the stress. And they were like, "Okay, now I can focus on my exam, and I'm all good." And I said it to someone else, and they were like, "Oh, what are you talking about? I need to pass the exam." Like, what? They thought there was something wrong with my head. So so I think it's like you got to be able to hear this message in the manner in which it's intended, because we're not saying, I guess in terms of examples, you actually gave an example of when you're in a relationship. And so do you want to expand on that, Becc?
Yeah, let me talk about that. Yeah, because this is something, as I've given this strategy to my clients over time as it's come up, I've also had to do some sort of convincing in places of like, no, thank you. That does not sound like A, it would be useful, but B, something that I'd want to do. But let me tell you how I've used it in a scenario that I mean, so the example that I've used it in over time is in my relationship. So when I was, so I started dating my current partner when I was more junior doctor. I'd done my internship in Tasmania, and I'd applied to work in different hospitals I wanted to go to a metro hospital in Sydney or Melbourne. And RPA was the hospital that I really wanted to go to, because it was, in my mind, the medical education hub. They had a podcast and things, and I was really into medical education. That was the place that I was like, if I go there, maybe I can get involved with some of this education, extracurricular kind of stuff. And I ended up taking the job in Melbourne instead. And actually, I accepted the job at RPA and I turned it down, and I took the job in Melbourne. So not only did I decide to, out of my own integrity, take this risk benefit of this was not an abandonment of myself in any way, guys, don't worry. This was something that was actually, when I took into account other things that were important to me in life and what the other hospitals in Melbourne had to offer me, but this also includes taking into account my relationship, I decided to go to Melbourne and invest in this relationship at the same time. So there was a lot riding on this relationship in this case. I was moving into state. I was just starting my career. I decided to start at a different hospital to what I ultimately planned. And I felt understandably quite vulnerable in that case. And early in a relationship, moving in together, there was, of course, that worry in my mind of, oh, what if this doesn't work out? What if this doesn't work out? And with that worry, with that fear, and with my resistance of like, what if it doesn't work out? It can't not work out because I've invested so much and I've made this plan, and the plan should go how the plan was made. I don't have control problems, guys. So I really wanted my plan to work out. I was attached to my plan, just like a lot of us are understandably attached to this outcome, wanting this outcome of passing the exam. I was attached to this outcome of wanting this relationship to work out. And that's not a bad thing. But in my case, it was becoming a bad thing because I would be having worries, anxieties about the relationship not working out. And that was causing me distress. It was causing me anxiety. And much like if you're coming up to an exam situation and you're having this resistance to the idea of failing the exam, you're wanting to avoid the possibility of failing the exam. Naturally, trying to avoid something that's not totally in your control is going to cause you anxiety and distress. That's the core of the problem here. We are trying to control something that we can't control, something that we do not have full control over, and our mind knows that. Our mind knows that, yep, we can do our best, and also it's possible that I'm not going to pass this exam because there is so much out of my control. Just like in my relationship, you might find that anxiety and stress is actually reducing the amount of control you have over the things that are in your control. That anxiety wasn't helping me show up as the partner that I wanted to be, to A, see if this relationship really matched me, right? If it suited me, if it was something that I wanted, but B, also be able to show up as, the person that I wanted to be for him. That anxiety and the stress was not helping me with that goal. It was counterproductive. So what my coach did for me in this scenario, when I couldn't see what was happening, I was just too worried about the fact that, something could possibly happen. And instead, they were like, okay, so what would happen if the relationship ended? They made me go to that worst case scenario that I didn't want to go to, that I was spinning on for, weeks, just deciding that it can't happen. I just can't let it happen. And as much as it's something that felt almost like it was a negative thing for the relationship, I was like, I don't want to imagine a life without this person. It's almost like that was some kind of betrayal of me to even think that way. Just like you guys are thinking, gosh, I don't want to imagine a scenario where I don't pass the exam and I'm okay, or just that I don't pass the exam at all, because then it's something that I am perhaps coming closer to accepting could happen. And we worry that if we go to that place of accepting that it will happen, that, like you suggested, will in some way make it okay for it to happen. But when we can accept the possibility of something happening, that acceptance comes with, as you're saying, this natural, and then what? Then what would I do to take care of myself? And it's okay if the first thing your mind says is, I wouldn't be okay. Like everything would be terrible. Even if your mind says that first, stay here. And maybe, do this in the place with somebody who you trust, or somebody who's a professional, somebody who can take care of you, because it can be very distressing to face a reality that you've been resisting. But when you can ultimately get to that point of the worst case scenario happens in your mind currently, and then you say, and then what? And you get to that place where you actually connect with yourself and you're like, exactly what happened to you, Kristeen. You're like, well, I would do this. Like, you are resourceful people by virtue of being people who can sit the BPT exams in the first place. I am willing to put money on your mind coming up with a solution that makes it okay. But all I want you to get to here is the realization, just a moment of not resisting that possibility, not believing that you wouldn't be okay in that scenario, not so that then you can manifest that and show up in that way, but so that you can get out of that stress, anxiety, fear cycle, so that you can release your mind from that, so your mind knows, oh, wait a second, that's not actually this big, ugly, scary, insurmountable thing that could happen in my future. Even if the worst thing happened to me, I am going to be safe. I am going to be okay. And yeah, it will hurt at first. Let's not lie to ourselves. But the idea that I wouldn't be okay is a lie. That's where we're trying to get here with this worst case scenario situation. And I don't have to tell people when I go through these scenarios with people that it was a lie. We realize that when we go to this worst case scenario, but you have to be willing to block out that 60 seconds, that 2 minutes to go there and actually check in with yourself.
It's pure magic. And it's literally, it feels like a shortcut to just getting out of your own way. Because like you say, you're just so much more likely to function. Your nervous system will just calm right down. And I think that's the key. I think it's getting your sympathetic nervous system out of the way. And it just feels like such a life hack. And it's just not intuitive because we don't get there until a coach comes along. I'd never thought of doing this until I had that interaction with you. And now it's like I try and sprinkle it on anyone who's close to me because I'm like, have you tried this? It is literally within seconds, minutes. You can just feel so much better. And not because you're planning to fail, not because you're planning to have a breakup or whatever it is, just because you just understand, oh, actually, I'm going to be all right because life goes on, the world continues to spin no matter what. And just having that perspective, it just sets you free in a way. It's just so beautiful. And you can start to function at a level that is compatible with passing the exam and living the life of your dreams. It's ironic.
Yeah, it's just getting you unhooked from those distressing, non-functional emotions. It's all it is. And it truly is a practice of acceptance. You know how you hear people, it's really super Zen people talk about all the time, how like, we need to get to acceptance. We need to get to acceptance. And you're like, what does that even mean? This is one of those scenarios. We're not saying that it's all going to be sunshine and rainbows and wonderful. But as long as you're resisting something that's out of your control, you're going to act crazy, certified crazy. Right? That would be the normal reaction. You're trying to control something that you can't control. Certified crazy is the normal reaction. Like I catch myself in this all the time. I have so many certified crazy certificates up here on my wall. You just can't see them. It's something that has to be done on purpose. I think that's the thing to notice. If you're feeling fear, I think for me, the thing that made me really do it with my relationship, even though it was the most counterintuitive thing, it felt like it is the opposite direction that you want to go in. We just want to recognize that it's not supposed to feel like a normal process. Let it feel not good at first. It's one of those things where it gets worse before it gets better. But just because it feels bad doesn't mean it is bad. Getting to this, we want to get you out of this cycle of essentially powerlessness. If you're trying to resist something that's out of your control, you're disempowered. You're not in power here. We're just trying to get you back in control. And what we get to do when we do this is then give all of our attention to the things that we can control. That's how it improves your performance. You take all that energy that you're putting into your anxiety and stress and the attention just going on in the background, worrying about the exam, worrying about things you can't control. You can take that and put it into things that you can control. Strategically studying, putting some attention to your consultant self, as you say, Kristeen, as you teach your ducklings in your Rock Your Long case, your consultant self. If you can pour your attention into studying strategically and your consultant self, ironically, that's the thing that is going to help you control the thing that you can't control. Focusing your attention on what you can control. It's a bittersweet reality, isn't it?
I'm also laughing because like twice in this episode, you've completely outed me for calling my Dr. Humans ducklings. I definitely call you my ducklings and I'm definitely Mama Duck. But I try not to do it so that you can hear me do it because it's kind of patronizing and condescending to call a fully grown Dr. Human a duckling. But Becc has outed my truth. You are my ducklings. All right, so.
You say Dr. Humans with your Dr. Humans.
But I also do, I definitely call them my ducklings, which I feel a little bit bad about, but also it feels like my truth. I'm very conflicted. So I'm sorry if that offends anyone, but yeah, sorry, you are my ducklings. I really can't help it.
The context that I have in my head is you come off a call and you're like, my ducklings, they're so gross.
I'm always so proud of my ducklings. I know, I really am. But it's funny because I use the word and it feels so authentic to me. And then I'm like, I don't know if they'd like that. I don't know. Oh, well.
We really hope this episode has been useful to you. It's something that you have to take a bit of a chance with yourself on. But if you do notice that you're resisting a reality, if you're resisting a possibility in the future, then this can be something that is incredibly freeing. And your energy is so precious right now. It's so important for you to do what you can to give yourself the best shot in this situation when you've put in so much hard work. If you can be willing to feel the negative emotions, which you can totally handle, if you're willing to feel them for a couple of minutes, you can free yourself from this stuckness. And if you do get stuck, let me know. I'll help you out with the next steps.
You are a thought wizard. Thank you so much, Becc. Thank you for all the coaching you've given me to transform my life. Thank you for allowing me to pick your brain today so I can pass on all of your wisdom to all of my ducklings and Dr. Humans that I hold so dear. It just matters. It really matters. And I know that this is going to help so many people who are listening, especially if you can just open up to hear it and go there. I think this will make the world of difference. So thank you so much, Becc. Thank you so much to everyone who's listening. I really hope this helps. Sending so much love to you as you work towards your exams. See you next week. Bye.
I've been waiting all my life for something. I've been down the darkest roads and up